Hello Furs from the web, my name is Scar, and today I'm joined by a fellow furry history YouTuber named Labb Ratt. This is the story of ConFurence. Stay tuned. In the earliest days of the fandom, before the online social spaces that rose in the 90s, things were obviously quite a bit different than they are today. The inception of furry fandom more or less took place in the walls of a convention, and for quite a while the conventions would be the main ways furries interacted and connected. Not in their own conventions though, at least not yet. This was a time of room parties and Comic-Cons. From both San Diego Comic-Con and WesterCon, the popularity at these parties was rising. On January 21st and 22nd of 1989, the first furry convention was held, ConFurence 0. 65 attendees showed up, which seems like a far cry from the conventions of today, but it was a pretty good turnout for the first furry convention ever. 90 people had signed up, and the proto-convention, as people described it, featured a small dealer's den and 2 rooms that hosted a variety of panels. Included but not limited to these was a panel on fursuiting, for zooting as it was called back in the day, a screening of Animal Olympics, and the art auction that raised $1,100. ConFurence managed to sprout up right before the time period I refer to as the furry renaissance. I discussed the online and political climate of this time period in my Birth to Burn Fur video, but the ripples of the newfound popularity would be felt in all corners of the fandom. ConFurence was not exempt from this, with the first proper con in 1990 doubling the previous year's attendance count and its admission price. 200 people registered with 130 showing up. Through the coming years, the convention would continue to rise, with counts going to 200, then 400, 500, 600, 700, 875, and eventually 1,000 at ConFurence 7 in 1996. 1997 was the first year another convention giant was created, with Albany Anthrocon premiering that summer, with a turnout of 500 furs. Albany Anthrocon was born across the nation, and out of a desire to distinguish itself from its cousin on the West Coast. The reason is because ConFurence was evolving in what many considered an unpleasant way. It slowly began to change away from its original conventions, and as the years went on through the furry renaissance, it began to get more adult. In the political climate of the 90s, it was only going to get messier, with ConFurence 8 right around the corner. The attitude toward ConFurence by 1997 was very split. The very name became baked in controversy, and many were driven away from it. The atmosphere, the convention itself, not only attracted more adult aspects, but actively indulged in it. One of the most divisive activities were the slave auctions, later renamed the pet auctions. These allowed people, often suitors, to offer services to attendees in the form of an auction. Officially, nothing of an illegal, prostitutional nature was allowed to be done, but the behaviors can easily be seen as hinting at that sort of thing. Things like this became shunned by future conventions, and it's hard to find any of these at cons today. While not widely discussed today, another staple that would exist at every conference in its lifetime, after ConFurence 3, was the cabaret Fur le dance. This event would get tamer as the years went on, but at the heart it was an erotic and often fully sexual dance performance that many took place in. It was for obvious reasons restricted to those above the age of 18, but they introduced a first half that was a cleaner show for those younger. Once that ended, though, it was right back to the furry strip club. This, along with the pet auctions, were actually carried into real life from versions that took place over on Furry Muck. Looking back, I'm not sure if it was the best move, though, but they weren't the only reason ConFurence got the reputation that it did. There were other things that transpired at ConFurence, including reports of a man wearing nothing, and I mean nothing but Dixie cups. This argument about whether it was Dixie cups or a furry G-string at ConFurence 7 was debated, as were many more allegations. There were even reports on Alt.fan.furry of semen being found inside of the elevators at ConFurence 8. These sort of rumors were rampant. There were even stories of full-on sex in the halls and nudity in public spaces. Whatever your opinion on all of these things, however, they in themselves were not the most dangerous thing to come out of ConFurence. It was the lack of care when it came to any form of concealment.
When furry fandom first began, as an organized fandom, late 1980s, early 1990s, it was organized by some fellows in a West Coast region who, as enthusiastic as they were, really did not pay much mind to the sort of public image they were giving to this burgeoning fandom. The early furry conventions, let's face it, I was there. Some of these early fan conventions for this little furry fandom that was first emerging into the world scene kind of looked like Pride Fest on an acid trip.
One gray muzzle I recently got into contact with, named Random Coyote, has become a good friend that I email questions that I have about things I talk about in these older history videos, and he's been incredibly helpful with giving further insight into my research. I asked him, and he agrees with the statement Uncle Kage made about just how careless people running the convention were. Quote, as to Kage's observation about the conference creators being out of lunch when it came to public perceptions, I'd say that's mostly true. I'd also say that there was a bit of willful ignorance or even disdain for the concerns about public perception. After all, even mainstream science fiction fans back then were still largely looked down as nerdy losers. Then lower on the pecking order came anime fans, and so on, and of course furry fans were at the bottom of the pack. Add to that, Mark Merlino and Rod O'Reilly, the creators of ConFurence, were also openly gay, and modern acceptance of LGBTQ people was not yet happening. So to an extent, I think they felt normal society had already pretty much rejected them, so why should we care one whit about normal society's sensitivities in return? In many of my videos, I mention how the media portrayal of furries didn't come out of nowhere. Well, this is partly where it came from. It started in 1998 with Heavy Petting, then Eurotrash, then Vanity Fair, and before you know it, CSI. ConFurence 8 was the smoking gun that started the chain of bad media press that has tainted the fandom until this day. This started with the decline of Eurofurence, but the drama wasn't over yet. The beginning of the end started when Mark Molino resigned from the chairman position, and Daryl Exline took up the mantle starting with the decade. But that part of the story is reserved for my friend Labb Ratt. Take it away.
Right! Now, every furry con has its kinks, its flaws, its dirty little secrets, but this con had a very dirty secret. So back in 1997, when ConFurence 8 happened, there was a group of the furry fandom that was hellbent on dividing it. The burned furs. They may be asking, Labb, what's a burned fur? Let me tell you. The burned furs were a group that seen perversion in the furry fandom and were going to remove it. How they were going to remove it? Block and report? Ha, no. Violence and threats of it. Many furs within that time would receive death threats from this group and to stop their perversion, or else only would physically attack them. This group also begun to attack people for different lifestyles, i.e. gay people. One member, Mr. Handog, was exiled from the group for being overly homophobic after a breakdown online. This was also caused others within the fandom to factionalize themselves, making the furry fandom in an all-out war. There were the burned furs, the freezing furs in direct opposition to the burned furs, and then there were two groups known as the peaceful furs and the non-aligned furs. These people had no fighting at all. Now that you're educated, you may be asking, well, Labb, what does this have to do with anything? Literally anything we were speaking of, what does that have to do? Well, shut up and listen. During the state of decline that ConFurence was in, the chairman, Mr. Mark Merlino, resigned, and a man named Daryl Exline took over. Now, right from the get-go, Con's overall attendance was dropping, but knock knock, let me go open the door. Who is it?
Here's the door. Oh, I'm opening the door. Out you go, stupid.
Only the one and only Hangdog back to ruin the party. Now, Daryl didn't help himself admitting to openly that he was a burned fur, and Hangdog immediately publicising it. Daryl's a burned fur. This conference is only for our treehouse, and you normal humans can't come to our fucking treehouse, you dickheads. This didn't help one bit that the con was already in massive decline. Imagine cutting 90% of the attendance, and finally, in 2003, the final conference happened, attended by only 470 people. Only 5 years before, the con was registering over 1,200 attendees for Conference 9. Rumour has it that when Daryl was closing up shop finally, the outsider from Dishonored showed up and was like, well, Daryl, I've had a
lovely time.
Because this con's high chaos run had ended. I made a Dishonored joke. I'm done, boys, I'm Gucci. Thank you very much, Scar, for allowing me to come on and make a video. And if you didn't know, I have a channel and we made a video over there about Kurrel Raven. You can go watch it for yourself. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. And I've actually fallen out of the pit. That has been what a demotivation. Goodbye.
Anyway, guys, thanks for hanging out with me and Labb Ratt for the story of ConFurence. I will have his channel linked in the description and on screen. There is another half of this collab on his channel, a video about Kurrel the Raven. He also featured me in his Furry Decade Rewind video, so go check that out as well. I know I said the next video was going to be the growing pains, but I wanted to get these out first, so it's next, I promise. So until then, stay possum.